On today's episode of Locked On Lightning, we talk about Stamkos' exit. Who's to blame after the dust has settled a couple of weeks in the books? We take a look back on what was one of the biggest moments in Lightning history. We also fast forward to now, or a year from now. What are the ramifications of that? How will our view change of that? We talk about that, as well as wrapping things up with some trade rumors. All that coming up and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Dankert. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Locked On Lightning. On today's episode, we're taking a break from our rewatch of the 2004 Stanley Cup playoff run by the Lightning, and we kind of revisit the whole Steven Stamkos exit topic. After a couple of weeks have passed, we have finally, I guess, can take a step back and look at this objectively. We'll talk about it, as well as a year from now, how will we think about it? We talk about that, as well as wrap things up with some trade rumors. But before we grab any of those topics, I want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the summer comes on and there's really not that many sports around, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone. Every day, all summer long, visit FanDuel.com to get started. So it's been a while. We are now July 17th, 16 days removed from what was or will be considered one of the biggest moments in Lightning history. Believe it or not, if you believe that or don't. I mean, it really is a monumental moment, and even the negative ones can be when we're talking to moments and historical moments in franchise history. And there was a lot of things said about Julien Brisebois, about Steven Stamkos, positive and negatives there. I said my piece at the time. If you want to go back to my initial reaction and the subsequent episodes that I did, in which my thought or how I felt about it at the time, you know, I think it changed somewhat. But now that we have had a couple of weeks to kind of ponder about it and really kind of examine it, it's one of those things where I feel like a lot of us, and we'll talk about more about this in the second segment because it does tie in with that. I think a lot of us will play that mental ping pong here and there, not only this upcoming season, but for seasons to come. And especially when Stamkos does come back and get his number retired and all that, and eventually will most likely have a statue built outside of Amalie for him. I mean, I would be shocked if that never happens. But it will always be a question for Lightning fans. What if he stayed in Tampa Bay? And I would imagine with all Lightning fans that ask that question, there will always be some sort of issue or argument had to where whose fault it was. Why did he leave? Now, at the time, a lot of people were quick to blame Julien Brisebois. Deservingly so. He is basically the face of the franchise to a certain extent that is not a player. Obviously, he was the point man on these negotiations. It was leaked out, I think, weeks before about what exactly he offered Steven Stamkos initially, a $3 million AAV contract, which I think was for 5 or 4. I don't remember the exact offer. Regardless of the length of the contract, we all know $3 million is really unacceptable, especially after the season that Steven Stamkos had. Now, obviously, if he did have a terrible season or a season in which we started to see the regression in his game, maybe the case could have been made for at least maybe 3.5. I mean, 3 is way too low. And I kind of spoke about this on my other episodes, discussing it afterwards. I feel like and this is probably a easy cop out for some of you and you're probably going to call me on it, and go ahead. That's fine. We could have the conversation. And I think that really, if you're going to look at this situation or this result objectively and without bias, blame has to be placed on both sides. On the side of Brisebois, of course, he should have offered him just a little bit more. I was saying it throughout the latter stages of the playoffs, or at least even after, almost right after the Lightning were eliminated by the Panthers, that Stamkos should really receive something within the $4.5-5 million, and 5 is really pushing it. But the $4.5-5 million range, maybe 3 years or something like that. It was tossed around the idea as well, not necessarily on this show, but around on the internet. And who knows, we may never know this, but the Lightning supposedly made a number of deals with Stamkos, or offers, mind you. And one of those offers, which I thought was probably the best one that I heard, was that they were going to give him a 1-year deal. I don't remember off the top of my head what the AAV was, but if I had to guess, it was probably maybe 3.5. And then afterwards, when he turns 35, they're allowed to give him bonuses, and then they would have been able to give him a lot more money of what he wanted through the signing bonuses. And I think that would have been a pretty good deal for him. But obviously that is not something that he wanted. And that's why when I look at this situation, there has to be a good amount of blame to be put on Stamkos. Because realistically, and I know a lot of people, the argument is going to be made, well, he's been here his whole career. You know, why would he not want to stay? He did everything he could to stay in Tampa Bay. My response is, did he though? And I say that because of two things. One more egregious than the other. The first was he doesn't get the deal he wants, rightfully so. He is well within his right to explore the free agent market, as I feel like a lot of us kind of figured what was going to happen. He signs right away with Nashville, 4 years, $32 million, $8 million AAV, which is wild, which is, in my opinion, that's going to be a ridiculous overpay in about 1 to 2 years. And that's kind of was my first red flag, because Steven Stamkos is, in my opinion, I think he's a reasonable guy. Seems like he's down to earth. He obviously wanted to stay in Tampa. There's no doubt about that. But I feel like, especially this season, regardless of when Julian Brisebois came out and made it clear we're not trading Steven Stamkos, regardless. That's it. End of story. I feel like at this point in your career, after everything you've accomplished as a player and really what you mean to the franchise, I feel like his ego kind of took a little bit of a bump there. And I feel like as the season went on, obviously he played well. I mean, we have really no idea what went on behind closed doors, the conversations that were had. But after the playoffs ended, and then you kind of start to hear things, oh, both sides are still very far apart on a deal, this, that, and the other thing. I started to feel like this wasn't just about money. This was about pride. I felt like Steven Stamkos was going for that last paycheck. And I really want to know eventually, if we ever get it, what he thought or what was he expecting to get from Lightning. Because I'm going to sit here and say, I don't think it was $8 million AAV. I would be shocked. But what was the range and what was the length of contract? Because I didn't really so much have an issue with length of contract. If you want to give him 4 or 5 years, that's fine. That's fine. But you can't expect him to get anything above 5. 5, I think I said at 1.5.5 was maybe pushing it. And this was even before the whole McDonough deal happened. But that was one of it. And then to go on Sportsnet immediately, 20 minutes after it was announced that the deal is done, he's going to be a Nashville Predator, to go out and play the victim card on a very major media network, I thought was poor taste. And I think that had a lot to do with a bruised ego. That's what I saw from it. And I'm not, listen, and I'm sure I'm going to get this in the comment section on our YouTube page, and that's fine. But I want to make it very clear to all of you, this is not me being, this is not me saying, well, he left, so now I'm going to make him into the bad guy. No, I'm playing both sides. Both sides are at fault. Brees Bosch should have made an offer that was reasonable and realistic. And I mean, listen, at the end of the day, he's a person. And if you don't give him the right deal, especially after everything he's done for you, he's going to be pissed. I mean, the guy had another 40-goal season this year, and you're going to give him $3 million? And on the other side of that, Stamkos, unless he was completely or chose to be clueless about this, should have went into free agency with measured expectations and should have understand if he didn't, even if it wasn't his problem, should have realized or understood that the Lightning only had a certain amount of money to spend on him. Because, and this is what was my case for him kind of coming back and maybe taking less than what he would have liked. Do you want to make money or do you want to win? And unfortunately, he answered my question. He wants to make money. Because I don't care what anybody says. I don't care what the odds makers say. Our good friends at FanDuel have the Predators as the 5th best odds. It might have changed since the recording of this podcast. But last time I checked, they had the 5th best odds to win the Stanley Cup. And I don't believe that for a second, that Steven Stamkos is going to a Stanley Cup contending team in Nashville. Absolutely not. And when you measure up these two teams without Steven Stamkos, Tampa Bay, Nashville, what really separates them? And what really puts one, or if any of the others, over? Let me know in the comment section below. Let me know how you feel about the Stamkos thing. Because like I said, I'm not trying to come here and bash him. Absolutely not. I mean, I wish I could be sit here talking about how he re-signed and how this team is going to be even better. But unfortunately, that's not the case. It's a sport. You come attached to these players, but at the end of the day, it's a business. And Julien Brisebois, as tough as the decision that he had to make, he has to worry about life after Steven Stamkos. So, yeah, let me know in the comments below. It's a complicated situation. I mean, really, in situations like this, unless a franchise was completely, unless Brisebois, I mean, $3 million is low, but I mean, he could have given him an offer that was way worse than that. Especially if the Lightning had plenty of capital to spend. Yeah, but obviously that wasn't the case. So let me know in the comment section below. And coming up in just a little bit, we're going to continue the conversation about this, about how, in a year from now, in July of 2025, how are we going to view this situation? How are we going to continue to figure out, who was in the wrong and who was in the right here? So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But first, we're going to talk about our first sponsor on today's show, and that is our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Now, I love sports. I love baseball, basketball, football, obviously hockey, tennis, Formula One, all those sports. Football, basketball, hockey, not in season. We got baseball, a little bit of tennis, a little bit of F1. But really, the sports don't feel busy. It's not busy. But FanDuel continues to stay busy because this summer FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So as always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Go ahead, subscribe to our channel there. Hit that notification button so as soon as the newest episode drops, and you'll be notified. You could go ahead and follow more of my work over at boltsbythebay.com. We'll be talking about Frank Vatrano later on, and we will be posting an article. I'll be putting out an article on Bolts by the Bay tomorrow. And keep an eye out on my Twitter page because I post the link to all of them. So go ahead and check out not only my work, but also some of the work of some other phenomenal writers there on Bolts by the Bay covering the Tampa Bay Lightning. So go on over to my Twitter page at DankyDank, DENKYD8NK. Go ahead. You could ask me a question about anything pertaining to the Lightning. So let's put ourselves, as we've done recently. If you haven't checked it out, we've been doing a full-on rewatch of the 2004 Stanley Cup run the Lightning had, in which they went on to obviously win their first Stanley Cup. Right now, tomorrow we're going to put out our episode recapping Game 3 of the Eastern Conference quarterfinal against the New York Islanders. At the point we left it off, the Lightning and the Islanders are tied at 1-1 after splitting first two games of the series at the St. Pete's Forum. So go ahead and check those out. Like those. Help us build the page. We're almost at 1,000. So tell your friends, tell your mother, tell your classmates, your coworkers, if they want to learn more or keep tabs on Lightning hockey or revisit some memories. Go ahead at Locked On Lightning. Even though we've been living in the past as of late, let's put ourselves in the future for a couple of minutes. So, like I alluded to before, as with all things, whether it be good or bad, especially the bad, because I think obviously that's something we dwell on in life more than anything, is the bad things. And especially even, if you want to go a step further in the future, when the Lightning retires number and make a statue, we'll always have the conversation, what happened with the whole Stamkos thing. And I know a lot of Lightning fans, including myself, we are upset about the situation's result. And I think not a lot of people are upset about how it went down necessarily, because like I've said multiple times, and I will continue to say multiple times, how really it's one of those things where we know just enough to have an opinion, but not enough to really have a definitive idea about what really went down. And I think we may never. Who knows? Maybe when he gets his number retired, he could sit down and really tell his side, and Bruce Bach could maybe tell his side and all that stuff. Who knows? But we're looking at a year from now, because I think that obviously this first season, the first one that the Lightning will have without Steven Stamkos in a very long time. And I've said multiple times, and I will continue to say that this will be a season of really the Lightning trying to figure out who they are once again. You lose your captain, you face your franchise. It really kind of messes things up quite a bit. The chemistry, just the mojo, all that stuff. But I firmly believe that how we view this whole thing is very contingent on how the whole season goes. If the Lightning have a good season, Stamkos takes a step back in Nashville, I think a lot of Lightning fans will hail Julien Brisebois as a hero. Well, not a hero, let's not say that, but as a guy who saw the incoming weather forecast of what was to be with this Lightning team, as well as Steven Stamkos. But as we all know, what the opposite of that would be. Lightning have mediocre season, maybe make the playoffs, have another very early exit out of the playoffs, and Stamkos continues to score 40 goals a year and doesn't miss a beat in Nashville. And even, especially if Nashville makes it further in the playoffs, a lot of Lightning fans are going to be pissed, and rightfully so. But I think that as a fan base, as a rational group of hockey fans, I think it's very important that not only Lightning fans not judge this team every step of the way and say, listen, if Stamkos was here, you can't do that. It's not fair to yourself as an objective hockey fan, and it's not fair to this team because, like I said, this team is now post-Stamkos. It's going to be a tough period. It's going to be a learning period for this team. And we're really going to see who's good and who has potential to be very good and who maybe's performance was a product of him being on this team for a certain amount of time. And I think that really that's something that we need to remember. And I'm going to try to remember when I'm discussing this team and evaluating them and doing all that good stuff. But I think that there is a situation where we could be indifferent about it. I think that if the Lightning do well, if Stamkos does well, and there'll be bumps along the road. There always is. But as long as the Lightning figure out a way to win games and they play the right way, I know that's a cliche, but I always say that because it's absolutely true. Even when the Lightning win games, they don't necessarily play the right way. As long as they figure out who they are, because, I think we'll be able to tell relatively quickly if they're for real or not. I think that there is a scenario, there is a world we could live in, especially a year from now, where the Stamkos trade the Stamkos exit didn't necessarily hurt the Lightning. I think if I had to predict, I think that, yeah, it's going to suck at first, and I wouldn't be surprised. And if you're going to be at the games, please don't boo. But I think the Lightning will go through a period where they won't play well to start the season. And that's just something we're going to have to deal with. But I think that ultimately better off, this team will be better. I think they'll be able to be more creative. I think they'll be able to throw a lot of different looks at goaltenders. And we'll see some guys step up this year. Maybe some guys necessarily that we didn't think had it in them. Maybe some individuals from Syracuse. So let me know in the comments below. I mean, we'll obviously talk about it a little bit more as we get into training camp and then the season starts. But it's going to be interesting. I think that, though, I think ultimately this was the right thing for both sides. So let me know in the comments below. I know it's a little bit of a delicate situation to talk about, and still is a very controversial topic for a lot of Lightning fans. So coming up in just a little bit, one of the guys that I would hope is in a Lightning uniform come the beginning of the season is Frank Vatrano. There's some rumors going around Twitter that he could very well be in the plans for the Lightning this offseason. We'll talk about that coming up in just a little bit, but we're going to wrap things up with our last sponsor on today's show, and that is our friends over at Indeed. Now, summer is in full swing. Got college students who maybe graduated and weren't able to find jobs right away. They're on Indeed. You're a new employer. You're trying to start your own business. Maybe you just graduated from college. You're trying to find the right fit for your company that you're trying to build and be successful and all that stuff. Well, guess what? The best platform on the internet, in the world, really, to find the best employees is Indeed. Because if you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you could connect with candidates faster. And Indeed just doesn't help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. So go over to Indeed.com right now, because listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about it on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. So wrapping things up real quick, little bit of a rumor going around. I was very pleasantly surprised by this. One of our listeners actually brought this to my attention, and they know who they are. So congratulations to you. And so it was brought to my attention that the Lightning and the Ducks have been going back and forth, I guess, over the last couple of days, maybe even the last week. They've sent some, from my understanding, a couple of trade packages. The Lightning obviously are trying to round out their bottom six, trying to look for not only leadership, but also someone that could put the puck in the net. Obviously, that's the end goal for every hockey player. And the name that really popped up that really surprised me, because I've always been a big fan of him, is Frank Vatrano. You may know him from his time in Florida. You may know him from his time most recently with the Rangers. It was reported by Roger Hicks that the Lightning offered Ethan Gauthier, Nick Perbix, and a 2025 second and a fourth round pick for, I mean, this is still ongoing negotiations, which is, I would have to say, if that's all for Vatrano, that's very hefty price. A very, Vatrano's a very good player. I think that he could really bring a lot to this team. But his numbers last year, let me know. I'm not entirely sure if this is the right the right price. Last year, he scored 37 goals and had 60 points. I think really what it comes down to, if you're going to try and rationalize that kind of trading of hauls, is that really your end goal is you want to get rid of Perbix. You're going to have to give a prospect. Ducks are trying to get younger. 2025, second and fourth are kind of just icing on the cake. I would imagine, if I had to guess, Julian Brees-Boss is maybe trying to pick up another player, if not a draft pick. So in case you were wondering, which I'm sure a lot of you are, Vatrano will be a UFA next offseason. He has a cap hit of $3.6.5 million. Yeah, it's a little bit of a heavy price considering the Lightning have really no money to spend. I just think that if the Lightning do indeed get Vatrano, they're still obviously far from done from making moves, and that's a good sign. You know, you never want to have an offseason in which your team is just, that's it. You know, you don't want to have a team that is done early on. And I think that, you know, especially with the holes that the Lightning have, I think that is a good thing. And I will say the thing that piques my interest with a potential deal with the Ducks is this. And obviously the price tag will go up a little bit higher in terms of what the Lightning need to give up. But I think in the end it might be, you could tell me too, if this would be worth it. Why settle for Vatrano when it's been very well known, and plus you'll have team control for quite some time after next season? And I would hope Julien Brisebois is discussing this, or has maybe thrown it out there and see what Anaheim says. But what about Trevor Zegras? I think in the right environment, which obviously he hasn't really been in Anaheim, he could flourish in Tampa Bay. I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world to possibly consider bringing in Trevor Zegras, who will be 24 this season. Or, excuse me, he becomes an RFA in 26-27. He carries a cap hit of $5.7.5 million. You know, you find a way to move Chernak and you're in business. And I look at it this way. The reason why I bring up Zegras instead of Vatrano, why I'm kind of leaning towards him, is because he's going to be 23 this year. And then maybe even this year, I would hope early on, you bring in Connor Geekie, newly acquired from Utah, a center who plays with a lot of grit, 11th overall pick in his draft class. Bring in Zegras. You have those two guys play together with a vet. I mean, you're rolling. Not only are you now making your team immediately better, but now you have two guys that you could kind of build around for the future. When Hedman retires, when Kucherov starts to get on the older side, Point starts to get on the older side, you have two guys who could be the new cornerstones of your franchise. And who you have a very good group of players that could definitely teach these guys not only how to play hockey at a higher level, but also how to be leaders for many years to come. So let me know in the comments below. I mean, realistically speaking, I don't think the Lightning have a shot in hell to get Zegras. I would love to have that. Just the idea of Zegras and Geekie playing together on the same line gets me a little giddy. But yeah, it's definitely a conversation that I think that even though it's really not that realistic, it's a conversation I'd love to have. And I'm sure if you've been a listener of this podcast for quite some time, you know I'm a sucker for such conversations. So let me know in the comments below how you feel about that. Give me your trade predictions, or really your trade packages. If the Lightning were to kind of pivot and go for Zegras over Vatrano, or maybe get both, you know what? Give me a deal, if you're going to comment below, and I will talk about it on the next podcast briefly, because we will be continuing our 0-4 playoff run. Let me know in the comment section below. Trade packages for Zegras, trade packages for Vatrano, and then a third one that involves both players. I want to hear it. I love it when you guys get creative and you go ahead and do that on the comment section below on YouTube, or you go ahead and tweet to me at DankyDank, DENKYD8NK. Go ahead and let me know what is realistic, what is not, what is a good idea, and what is not. So join me tomorrow as we will continue our 2004 Stanley Cup segment. You go ahead, make sure to put on that notification bell, so as soon as the newest episode drops, you'll be notified. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.